Okay. Good morning, everybody. Apologies for the slightly late start to today. And welcome back to day 2 of Notes on BRESSON. Hopefully today can live up to the, I think, really incredible day that we had yesterday, which was a bit like a dream. I think lots of people said that. A day of people, hanging out in a room talking about BRESSON is like a sort of dream come true, and we get to do it again today. I'm Richard Bevan. I'm the program director of film and photography at Richmond University, and I'm also a co-chair of the conference with Jonathan Horrigan and Tamsin Clark. And it says I'm chairing the first session, but I'm almost gate crashing by also sort of presenting almost like a mini paper. The panel are aware of this, we've discussed this. And I think yesterday there was lots of conversations about people feeling like we shouldn't really be here for various reasons. That was one of the themes, wasn't it? And I think we probably shouldn't really be here in a way as well, in that we're coming from almost like a very different but connected world to lots of the conversation yesterday was obviously about film. There was lots of interesting points yesterday about Bresson's relationship to art, his background as a painter, potential kind of relationships to modern art and earlier painting. So yeah, let's make a start. So this panel today is going to look at Bresson's influence on sort of current contemporary art practice. When we first started to imagine this conference, this was immediately a panel that I wanted to get together, and both the speakers who are going to be speaking today immediately came to mind. So we have Sarah Pickering, who's going to be talking about a photographic project, and Sarah Dubai, who's going to be talking about a video project. All of us have made projects that directly reference aspects of Bresson's filmmaking, but this idea for a panel actually came out of lots of conversations I've had, and it'd be interesting to hear if the other two speakers have experienced this, but Bresson's influence can be felt and is discussed in lots of areas of contemporary art, not just people who are directly referencing his work like we are, but I've had conversations with painters, sculptors, installations artists, and they all cite Bresson as a kind of important influence on their practice. So hopefully we can kind of use these three like papers today and our discussion to kind of think about why Bresson has had such a kind of impact on contemporary art, and I guess why we might identify with his way of thinking and working. So I'm going to to do that, I'm going to start by talking about one of my projects. This is an exhibition that I had in a gallery called Kern Gallery, which is in Pittenweem in Scotland in 2019. And I'm sure some of you Bresson fans have already recognized the image on the screen. We've seen it a couple of times already in a conference, and probably many of you might recognize that bench as well, which I'm going to sort of talk about as we go today. So before I get into talking about the nitty-gritty of this, I'm just going to say that I studied fine art, I teach filmmaking, and my own art practice works in this space between filmmaking and photography. I have an exhibition on at the moment in Hamburg, which is a combination of film and photographic works, and the sort of the video-based works are of sort of objects. They're almost like still images, and the photographic works are sort of pointing towards a kind of movement or a process. So there's like a tension between the still and image, and I think that's definitely something I want to sort of think about today. The start of this project, that exhibition, was actually this, which is my laptop desktop wallpaper, which is still my laptop desktop wallpaper 10 years later. Before I get into that, though, I'm going to take another step back and think about the start of the project was sort of being introduced to Bresson's films. And I just really remember that feeling of never seen anything like this, and desperately wanting to kind of understand more about them, like finding them difficult in some ways, and just wanting to watch them again. Like, do I understand this? I need to watch it again. I need to watch it again. And I think Notes on Cinematography, which we're going to hear a lot about today, was really helpful for me in thinking about Bresson's films. And I think really interesting in thinking about our panel today. And this is what really got me into sort of thinking more passionately about Bresson. And I think in this book, we can start to see ways, I think, that we can connect Bresson to sort of contemporary art practice. I think yesterday there was conversations about this idea of like minimalism or a kind of paring down. And I'm sure you've all seen a sort of contemporary art exhibition, and that is a huge concern for not just sort of mid-century artists we were talking about yesterday, but for sort of current practice as well. It's kind of like focusing in on details. I think there's also something that's the sort of foundation, I think, because we all teach as well, something that's a foundation of practicing contemporary art or fine art is this idea of like pushing boundaries and challenging conventions. And I think I can't think of another filmmaker who so eloquently, puts his whole sort of heart and soul into kind of doing that. So I think there's a sort of point of connection between a sort of contemporary art world and sort of Bresson's practice. On my studio wall for a very long time, I had this picture, and I've used this as a reference image for my current exhibition in Hamburg, which is all about trying to find a visual language for sort of feelings. And I think this too is another way that Bresson might certainly inspires my thinking, and maybe the other speakers we have this morning as well. But this idea that work is to be felt and not understood, I think that sort of points towards a kind of experiential experience that maybe like engages all of the senses, and it's not just like a vehicle for information. It's a way to arouse feelings. And that links to another image I've had on my computer desktop for a very long time. This is Bresson in Cannes. Speaking, I'm sure lots of people have seen this as well, the press conference for L'Argent in Cannes. And, I think his reply to this question where he's asked about the viewer and he says, which viewer? I think that is, something we probably all talk about with our students on a very regular basis. And I think there was a very interesting sort of debate about this yesterday with Bresson, is like, are the films and are these effects that he's creating for the viewer, or are they something that it doesn't matter about the viewer and they come to it and have to kind of piece together? I think either way, this kind of relationship to the viewer, I think, is very kind of similar to that of lots of sort of contemporary art. Bresson's also been a really, really important part of my filmmaking teaching. So I've been teaching at Richmond for 10 years, teaching filmmaking. And one of the first slides I ever made for a presentation was this. This is like week 1. And we have this quote from Notes on Cinematography. And I always tell my students, this is my ethos for teaching film. And this is why we're here. This is what your kind of task is. And it is to make visible what without you might perhaps never have been seen. And my course has changed drastically over 10 years, but this is still my first day, the first thing students see when they come to my class. So now I'm going to briefly talk about my project. So lots of my works up to the point of making this exhibition were based on reconstructing or remaking other images that already existed in the world. So finding an image in an archive or an image from a film. And I was actually like a bit stuck about what to do next. So I was like, what could this next image that I remake be? All of my work had focused on gestures and hands. And I was looking at my laptop desktop and I thought, well, why not this? It's been there for 3 years. There's obviously a reason that I've chosen this. And why could that be? And then I found this when I was preparing for the talk. So I think this must have been just after that very initial thought. And it's a very bad sketch, but it says that Bresson photo as film. So that was just like the first thought of, and it sort of spiraled and grew into this exhibition. And thinking about this image, I think when I started to think about that, rather than that just intuitive feeling, I'll do that. Like, okay, why am I doing this? I think one of the things I love about this image, and I think this is really something that Bresson relates to Bresson directly, is I think this is an image that I don't believe in like universal visual languages because context and culture obviously is super important. But I feel like I could take this anywhere in the world and show it to people, and they would get something from that image, and they would understand what that image is communicating. And I think I'm reading a book at the moment about Eros in ancient Greek, and I feel like I could take this back to ancient Greece and show it to somebody, and they say, yeah, that image is communicating to me. And I think that says something about Bresson's skill as a sort of communicator. I also think in the context of Balthazar, which is a film that I love and sort of dread to watch again because it's so upsetting. These moments in that film, these points where Jacques and Marie are on the bench, this idea of like this rest, there's like this horrible, and there's like a pause where something might happen, horrible pause. Thinking about that moment as well, I think this idea of the rest was really important for developing this. So I started, and I think this is probably the point where I become a heretic and probably the point where I get thrown out. But I started to break apart this image of Bresson, which I would imagine had been made quite intuitively and spontaneously from what I know of how he worked on set, probably deeply thought about prior to being there, but obviously not made with storyboards and things. So I had to be very un-Bresson and make this kind of reverse storyboard of picking apart this image, trying to understand how it had been lit, how it had been constructed, taking the composition apart so I could try and remake this as closely as possible. As an aside, at the same time, I went to the Cinémathèque in Paris in the French Institute, and they've actually got quite a lot of interesting material there. So they've got shot lists and other production documents for Balthazar. Didn't super prove useful for my project, but I think useful information. My first attempt was shot on a Bolex on 16mm. This is an iPhone photograph through the viewfinder of the Bolex. And I'd been working with 16mm up to that point, and it almost felt too close to Bresson, the sort of the grainy black and white, and it also felt a little bit too forgiving and a bit too easy. I wanted to really like challenge myself, so I decided to work with 4K for the first time to really like, can I make this believable and as close as possible? And hopefully, click again. Can we do it? It's a video, yeah, let's have a look. Okay, I'm just going to leave it play for like 30 seconds. So the video I ended up shooting was it is actually moving, honestly. It's a 12-minute static shot with no cuts of this moment from Bresson expanded. Obviously, they never touch. Almost. Okay, I'm gonna jump on. So this is back to Bresson's original. So I feel like I did a pretty good job in reconstructing that. And I love the effect of the video in what it did, how it expanded that moment, how it like brings people in and gets them to concentrate. I think that again is something very Bressonian in a sense, but in a different form. This is definitely where I'm an absolute heretic, because this is the set that I built in my flat to shoot that. So because I wanted that shot to be consistent and like a still image, and it was actually longer than 12 minutes, but I wanted the light to be consistent. So I had to basically make a kind of DIY studio in my flat. And then we're back to the exhibition, and I'm just very briefly sort of finished with talking about this, but thinking about this idea of the viewer and the viewer's experience of the work. I was really happy with the video, but I felt like it wasn't quite enough to kind of hold the exhibition that I was going to do. And I came up with the idea of trying to track down the same bench that was in Balthazar. And thanks to one of my French MA students who instantly found it on eBay in France, managed to get the exact bench that features in the film. And the bench was brought to the gallery space. And the idea was that the bench would not become a piece of furniture to sit on to watch the video, but the bench would become a really integral part of the experience of this exhibition. So the bench is actually facing away at a window, so you could see the video. My dream was that someone would go with a crush, someone you secretly want to hold hands with, and have this really uncomfortable experience together after watching that video and sitting on that bench. The postcard for the exhibition was this, a still from Balthazar. This was a way of like sort of using images and using visuals to kind of like guide people to this kind of interaction, to this scenario. And then this is a really short walkthrough. So you enter the gallery space, pick up a postcard. There was also one stuck on the wall. When you turned around, framed through the doorway was the bench. And it was basically at exactly the same sort of framing and position as the postcard. So it was like you're sort of almost like stepping into that world. You enter the space, and on the floor is this long video that you can watch for as long or as little as you want. Obviously, there's no beginning, middle, or end. It's a looping video. And then ideally, you have this moment together. You sort of step into kind of BRESSON. Okay, and that's me over and done. I'm now going to pass on to Sarah Pickering.
Thank you, Richard. We've got so many overlaps with our practice. I'm just going to start my timer. Okay, so thank you, Richard. Thanks, Tamsin and Jonathan, and also Sarah Dobai, who I'm on the panel with. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, this conference. I'm really excited to be part of it. So slightly different to Richard, what I'm going to do is talk about my practice in relation to BRESSON, but give you a bit of an oversight of what I do. And I think there are quite a lot of overlap. So I'm a British visual artist. I work with photography, and the themes and subjects that I work with do connect with BRESSON. And in particular, there's a piece called Pickpocket, which is a performance piece, which has a very direct relationship to BRESSON. But the more I've been thinking about his practice, I think kind of getting a little bit more of a general overview of my practice and the way I approach photography might be helpful. This image here is from a body of work I made at a police training site. And I'm interested in the kind of spaces where there's a kind of form of staging. So this could be a backdrop for action, and it is, but I purposefully filmed it, photographed it without any protagonist there, practicing for riots. My work deals with the idea of falsity and deception, and I put the process of photographic image making as a way of staging, observing, performing, and facilitating in order to examine and explore mediated versions of reality. and work beyond its confines. And central to my work is an intense and repeated scrutiny of the issues raised by subjects such as fakes, tests, hierarchy, science fiction, explosions, the medium of photography, and gunfire. So here is an image. Sorry, I'm working between two computers because I've got my notes on this one, but they're not up here on this one. So this is a body of work called Explosions, which I made with pyrotechnic manufacturers. And some of these pyrotechnic manufacturers not only made pyrotechnics for military and police training, they also worked on Bond movies. There's a kind of slip between preparing for the unexpected within a real life scenario and what imaginatively substantiates a realistic event and how that can be kind of packaged up, and then working to create a bit of awe and drama in a feature film. I really like the quote from Bresson about making visible what you may never have seen otherwise, and it's something that I've kind of sought out. It's also a little bit like trying on jobs vicariously. So I worked with the fire service with this body of work called Fire Scene, which will lead me into talking about the work that I made with Pickpocket. So this is being described as conceptual documentary, and it was a term used to describe a group of artists working sort of like around 2009, 2010, who photographed something that's genuinely unfolding in front of the camera, and it looks like a fiction, and it's a staged reality. So this staged reality is happening in a shipping container in the in the fire service training college for forensic trainees, and the forensic trainees don't actually see this as it stands. They filter through the ashes and they look for signs of the fire, burn patterns, and the bed of the fire. With this work, it was really important to me to exploit the integral structures of photography where you kind of still a moment and there's a kind of sense of what preceded and there's the inevitability of what follows it. I also like the idea that photography can be applied, so it can be used for medical purposes, for evidencing, for surveying, for weddings. And there's this kind of slippery kind of sense of purpose and evidence, and how evidence can actually be quite unreliable as well. So this piece, this is an installation shot from the European Biennale Manifesto 11, which was held in Zurich in 2016. And the theme of the Biennale was what people do for money. So in the permanent exhibition, like a exhibition, which was a big group show, these works were featured along with lots of other artists who'd worked with professionals. I had the opportunity to work with a performance piece, and so there was a call out for a performance piece in Cabaret Voltaire, and that is the bed of the Dada Manifesto. And it troubled me in a way that this Biennale was put on and I didn't properly get paid for participating. The people who were invigilating weren't paid either. And generally as artists, there's been a report by Artist Newsletter and We Industria that an average project, even with a big institution, works out about £2.60 an hour for labour. So very often, we're doing things for money, but the people that would have been collaborating with artists for projects would be getting a proper salary, and the artists invariably wouldn't. There are some exceptions to that. But I decided that I would like to do a performance piece, even though there was no money, and the performance piece was going to question, the presumption that you would be able to do a project without any money, and the kind of privilege that presumes. So I started thinking about, well, what's an upstanding profession? So my side hustle is teaching. This had mixed reviews on Amazon. But I thought, I could pick up some ideas here, and some very there's some very useful diagrams, which started to make me think about the relationship to classical painting and this idea of touch, and started thinking about, making some finger exercises, building up my confidence, destroying self-doubt and fear of failure was one of the messages in the book. And also this idea of misdirection, and you've got to train your misdirection muscles. Some interesting parallels to being an artist, being a teacher, being a performer, sort of dealing with this idea of imposter syndrome as well. But, like kind of acting out, and having a very professional approach to your subject. Lots of useful stuff on the internet as well. How Stuff Works had this, with this lovely kind of blow up feature of using misdirection or distraction by holding a magazine and popping your hands in a pocket. And also compassion gets used a lot in pickpocketing. So, a team will work together and someone might look hurt or have dropped something, and then the victim or the viewer, the kind of person who's been set up in this scenario would then get things stolen. So there's a nice parallel there between the idea of staging and directing too. So I was going to be working in Zurich, and I managed to find a pickpocket performer, a magician, who may have been a regular pickpocket beforehand. We never really managed to get deep into that subject to be able to really get to the bottom of what he did before he became a performer. But here he is practicing his art in the National Gallery in London. And very often these pickpocket performers, I've worked with too, they train the police. And so there's this idea of like being on both sides of the law, or being above the law, or kind of that feels to me like a conceptual work in its own right. The skill is an art. It's an art of pickpocketing. And so there's this interesting line between amateur, professional, and entertainer or serious endeavor. And there's a shady suggestion of protection and advice as perpetrators that's going on here, where people are like, oh, look, you pickpocketed me so easily. I found that in my research, the Daily Mail features a lot of pickpockets, if anybody needs any further reading. So this was my advert for my performance piece in Cabaret Voltaire. And so essentially, it's a tongue-in-cheek narrative about widening your skills to be market ready, generating alternative streams of income from your creative talent, and so on. So you would choose a benefactor, maybe look at Art Review's top 100 arts professionals, and then they could become an unknowing supporter of your practice. So it was framed as a training workshop for artists. In the one in Zurich, it was very interesting that actually somebody who'd collected my work came up on stage, and Christophe Ambray was taking her watch and then putting it in someone else's pocket, and it was a lot of fast kind of fun movement. But the idea was that people were being trained, but it's something that, as any practice, takes years and years of training. So you could never really pick it up in this short sort of performance session. So, yes, there's a kind of political motivation to do this work, and I'm sort of poking around at the structure of the art market and its relationship to my interest in production and systems of representation. Yes, you could become a criminal, you could become a performer, and I quite like the lines that you can tread between these two things. So alongside the performance piece, I did a couple of put pocket events, and let me just show you, sorry, it's a still from another performance, which was in Camberwell. Lee Thompson, who brought along his special pickpocket practice dummy, and he trains up the kids for Guy Ritchie's film Twist, which was a reboot of Oliver Twist. And he also advises the police on how to make the public aware of vigilance. So, there's this kind of, again, this really interesting line. I really like Bresson's statement saying that he wanted people to feel the atmosphere that surrounds a thief, and in that atmosphere that makes people feel anxious and uncomfortable. And actually, Lee felt very uncomfortable training artists to become pickpockets, and he kept asserting, that this was magic, this was performance. So it was quite interesting working with people who didn't want to fully get on board with the kind of irony of the premise. Okay, so these are a few stills from the performance and from Bresson, and I started thinking about the idea of artistic practice and acting and becoming an expert in a field of something which is bad. And I think, the idea that Michelle or Martin was being trained, and how genuine that was, and how it could be perceived as a documentary piece of an amateur learning, and this sort of line between, every photograph could be described in some way as a document, and everything that's filmed is documenting what's in front of the camera. So there's a kind of level of authenticity to this, and the way that the hands become protagonists, these tight crops, was super fascinating to me. I also loved it to find out that Kasagi, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who was the pickpocket thief who provided the guidance, became so famous after being part of the film that he then had to go straight and give up his career of criminality and become an entertainer. That's quite an interesting little nugget. So I found these production stills. Again, the idea of production stills on films is also really interesting to me, because they kind of embody the film within one frame, and not necessarily part of the film itself. They could be shot on set at the same time and sort of staged for the stills, for the promotional stills. So those are the three that I found, and then this is what I made. So similar to Richard, I painstakingly took the lighting, the props, and bought the right type of clothing. And every single one of these, there's three of them, feature my hands. So I then become the thief. I'm the protagonist. I'm hand printing 50 silver gelatin prints, which are playing card size, and they get redistributed amongst a crowd at a private view, or the visitors to the Biennale. So interesting to me is the idea that performance doesn't necessarily have a commodity. It's so much harder to be a performance artist than it is, when you make stuff, because there's nothing to sell. And I actually undermined that further by giving away a card, which is an edition print. It's maybe a bit of shy networking, but this idea of the flow of images. I was in an exhibition called Moving the Image, which was curated by Duncan Wooldridge, and there's a lovely little book that he's written a section about the pickpocket performance, and talks about the sort of dynamic movement of images, and the parallels between this work and the pickpocket movie featuring a scene at a race course, and the parallels between that and the art world, where gallery, maybe it's a bit far-fetched, but the galleries have a stable of artists, and the crowds of people, and generally, like there's this sense of affluence as well around, but also people taking risks on artists' work. Is it going to end up as something which is going to become financially lucrative to purchase an artist's work? So just move on. So this was on the back of the little prints. I made a rubber stamp and editioned the prints and signed them. Oh, sorry, am I going? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you for keeping me in both realities at the same time. Okay, so that's the back of the print, and this is documentation from the private view. This is the writer, David Campany, who's very pleased to get it. I don't know how he got that selfie. Yes, I think because I'm up to time, I'm going to stop there. But I have some extra work that I could, talk to you about another time, which relates to forgery, and I make my own art forgery as well. So these ideas of disrupting flow and disrupting the art market are very important to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to the next Sarah.
Okay. Thank you both. That's great. Lots of overlaps. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. So, as it says in the kind of program notes, I'm an artist who have recently worked with reenacting, representing classic works of cinema or literature and repurposing them in a contemporary context. So this was a republication of Nikolai's Gogol, The Overcoat. I haven't quite worked out how to use this.
Just a little arrow. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, oops. Yeah, as an artist book. Now, it was working with a publisher where they work with out of copyright classic works, Four Corners books. So there's a whole series of them. Madame Bovary, Heart of Darkness, working with artists. And these publications are led by the artists. So this was a publication that I came to doing in the wake of the 2008 financial crash, where I felt like there was this sort of dissonance between sort of advertising and commercial display and what was actually happening economically for people at that time. So this was published in 2008, and I think it's got a connection to Sarah's work in I think there's interest in the use of illusion and deception. So anyway, I'm not going to spend long on that because I've got quite a lot to say about this recent work. So, so I've also been a follower of Bresson for a long time and came to him through his work with actors. And I was actually introduced to him by an editor because of the way that I rehearse actors to the point where their sense of performance falls away and they internalize the situation that they're put in. So, so that was very much going on, and I've made another work in relationship to Bresson's Pickpocket as well, which I'm not going to talk about either. But so I came to looking at his film O Hazab Baltasar as a result of a decision to focus on a family memoir, and the family memoir is a childhood memoir about the experience of this family member in 1944 in Budapest. So, so 1944, it's the last year of the war. Everyone, pretty much by that stage, everyone knows what's happening, that genocide is happening, but you know, there is recognition of that internationally, but anyway, so that's just to say. So the Germans came into Hungary in March that year, and the opening account in this memoir was of an anti-Semitic attack that happened to this child of 10 in a patch of land called the Little Donkey Field. And through this anti-Semitic attack, by which he's told by a classmate, you can't go back to school because there's new legislation, which means Jewish children can't go back to school. The boy discovers his Jewish identity, which has been deliberately hidden from him by his parents. And so, as I say, Adolf Eichmann and the German forces have just entered the country, and after this, there's a huge raft of anti-Semitic legislation by which Jews are deprived of property, jobs, access to bank accounts, free movement, etc., etc. So something about the name of this place where the revelation of his Jewish identity happened connected to Ohazar Balthasar. So now Ohazar Balthasar is set in small town France. It's the story, as I'm sure everyone here knows, of a donkey who's passed from one cruel owner to the next and subjected to many forms of brutality. And like Mouchette, as was pointed out yesterday, and very interestingly discussed, Balthasar is focused on a blameless subject who finds themselves in circumstances that they can't control. So for this reason, this Ohazar Balthasar seemed to be a way to give an image to the text, which was, difficult to face. So as I don't know whether I need to summarize anything of the plot, but I was very struck by Bresson's decision to put the figure of an animal at the center of a film. And a friend of mine who's a writer sort of has talked about maybe it was only through working with Bresson that I could actually engage with this history, which is within my own family. I'd always sort of thought, oh no, I can't deal with that. Something I'm gonna, because my work doesn't deal with the personal. It's very conceptual. It's quite theory-led. It wasn't an easy step to make. So also it connected to a text that I was introduced to by Jeff Wall, actually, when I was on the MA course in Canada, a text called The Scapegoat. So René Girard, who's a sociologist, who talked about the will to put the blame outside. So the making of the film, was triggered, I think. I don't think I would have made it if it hadn't been for seeing the refugee crisis unfold in Europe and recognizing the historical resonance of the reporting of the refugee crisis. And particularly as this played out in Hungary. So there was a particular episode at a central station in Budapest where refugees from Syria and Afghanistan were corralled at a station, herded onto a train that was apparently bound for Munich, and then to their terror forced off into a refugee camp in the middle of the Hungarian plains. So reporting of this, and many other events, I think the sense of sort of history and the echo was noted by a lot of commentators. So the text of the memoir after this incident in the donkey field describes how Jay and his mother are forced to leave their home. Leave their home and most of their possessions and move to a so-called Yellow Star house, which housed dozens of other families of women and children, the men being already in forced labor camps. This was designated housing for Jews. It's quite particular to Budapest. There were 2,000 dotted around Budapest. They were in ordinary streets. So this is kind of an instance of genocide, or kind of steps towards genocide, happening in the middle of civil society, not outside of it, which is, I think, the more common understanding of what happened to Jews in the Second World War. It was all outside in camps, so that, you know, there's a kind of separation there, but that wasn't the case here. So the text is very closely based on the memoir, but there's lots of changes. So I've gone from the past to the present, and from first person to third person, and all the dates and most of the names of people and groups of places have been removed or substituted. And the reason why that was important was to make this connection to contemporary sort of affairs, where these things were coming to, you know, the kind of what's at stake resonated with history. So this is from a book. So we made a book of the film, but the central work is a film. The film is in color, the book is in black and white. So that's from the opening of the film. I do hope you will be able to see it. We'll be playing at lunchtime and later in a screening room. So it's, you know, I'll just show you some pages from the book. That's from which will give you a little sense of how the text and image play with and against each other. So I also sort of wanted to respect the tone and spirit of the memoir. So the thing of using initials was something that came from the memoir to protect the identity of some of the individuals. It also centered on a kind of simplified version of this traumatic experience, because it was aimed at the children of the family. And so there was this focus on how things felt physically, often. So the film was produced over 6 years, and I shot scenes from scratch, very carefully, very closely based on selected scenes from BRESSON, from Hazar Balthazar. But I wasn't really interested in things having exactly the same look. I didn't want to kind of mimic the kind of style of the, you know, the locations or the costumes of the actors. It was more to do with framing and structure and how the shots move from one to the other. There are other places where the relationship to the Bresson is more generalized, where I use the figure of the donkey to signal, and which particularly when I was working in Budapest, where the figure of the donkey and the girl move through the streets of the city, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So the film was shot between UK and Hungary, and the use of locations in Budapest were very important, often being very close to the actual sites where the events described took place. The use of these locations also reinforced a sense of sort of resonance. And unfortunately, Hungary's present day politics, with a nationalist and sort of xenophobic government, that sense of the past in the present is very real and very, you know, widely recognized. And for this reason, within the film, there is a temporal shift. So maybe through the figure of the donkey, you see the action as being positioned sometime in a vague 20th century past, but towards the later part of the film, you definitely come into much more, you know, more into the 21st century. And I was interested by some of the speakers commenting on how the play of past and present operates in Mouchette and Hazar Balthazar themselves. So, okay. So when I was working with the girl, the girl and the donkey in Budapest, I was kind of thinking partly about how Bresson works with the figure of the donkey as a witness to the brutality that he experiences and the brutality brutality inflicted on Marie. And so that was something that was very much in my mind. So sort of walking with him round the streets that were the very streets where some of these things happened. So, I was sort of interested I was sort of reading Agamben on the witness in the remnants of Auschwitz, and talking about the witness as always being those that can't, or speaking for those that can't speak for themselves. So the silence of the donkey is actually I was interested in that. So the text and the image come together through a series of lyrical connections. Broadly, this resides in the relationship between the narrative of the memoir, which describes how Jay and his mother are driven against their will across the city into ever more perilous situations, just as Balthazar is bought and sold or stolen, passing from one brutal owner to the other. And so by such means, the status of the donkey and the girl merge with Jay and his mother, just as the bully boys, Gerard and his friends, and their dog become synonymous with the fascist authorities. So, I mean, it's probably sounds like a stretch, and I can see people looking a bit dubious in the audience, but hopefully you'll get to see the film. It's, I'm not sort of imposing these two things onto each other in a kind of reductive way. It's kind of all about the slippages between the two and the points where they connect and they don't connect. So there's the scenes that I focused on in the film that were, the scenes where we're introduced to the donkey and we first understand him as a sort of hunted figure. And then, I've sort of done a script here which sort of like actually spells out some of the connections between the text and image. I'm wondering whether I need to do that or whether I've got time even. How am I doing with time? Okay. So I guess the first meeting with the donkey, in which we sort of see his relationship to the boys at the beginning, which is, I'll just go back, is paired with the description of the racist attack in the field. I'll just go back there. Yeah. So yeah. And then this is followed by the pursuit of the boys, after which he seeks refuge in the stable of his previous home with Marie and his parents. And that's paired with the description of Jay's shock and confusion at finding out his identity. And, part of this is he's a child who's grown up surrounded by anti-Semitic legislation, anti-Semitic propaganda, sorry. So he's devastated. And then that follows with the description of the impact of the new legislation, which bans him from parks, swimming pools. He has to hand over his bike, his camera, their phone. Right, and so that's kind of okay. And then we go to the moonlit garden. The garden scene was very important. It's such a beautiful scene. But I think, that's something that I was thinking about in relationship to yesterday's conversation. Sometimes I feel the beauty of his shots maybe deceive us about the actual violence and threat that is at play here. And we talked about it at dinner. So in the garden, Marie is watched from the shade of the undergrowth by Gerard and his friend. And they're watching her with desire, but it's a malevolent desire. There's a real threat there. And she's very vigilant to that. She's very aware that she can hear someone in the bushes. And so when we have another famous shot with hands on the bench, it's not like the one with Charles, which is sort of tender. It's full of this sort of potential violence. So this scene is paired with a description of Jay and his mother being ordered to the Yellow Star house, which they can't leave, and a description of the failure of Jay and his mother's attempt to escape at night and go in by taking off their yellow stars, which I call emblems in the film, and they go into hiding in a house on the outskirts, and they pay the owner to hide them, but it fails because it's the kind of tension of being in that space and the level of anxiety amongst all the children is too high, and they have to return back to the Yellow Star house. So this scene, the touch of Gerard's hand, I've already gone through that. So, and then, I mean, one other bit that I really wanted to talk about. So this is this diverges from Bresson. So I'm not always completely sort of truthful to Bresson, although I feel like I'm sort of truthful to the spirit of Bresson. And I guess when I was making the book, I was very interested in some of the repetitions, which I think got talked about with Michette yesterday. So things like the repetition of the shots of Marie's feet stepping in the garden, the donkey's feet stepping on through the fields and roads, and then the feet of the dancers in the bars dancing in broken glass. So, and then other images, like images of Marie and the donkey seen through bars. So sort of images of entrapment. So the bar scene, as I say, it's sort of, there's a temporal shift there in my film, but I think also in Bresson's. And this is playing alongside a description of the siege of Budapest. So at the end of 1944, Budapest was surrounded, and people, and those Jews that had survived were starving and in the ghetto, and it was kind of being constantly bombarded by from the air by Germans and Allies. So it's complete chaos, and I think that was another thing with the Bresson, which is kind of doesn't need stating in a way because it's obvious, but there's this sense of survival by chance was kind of quite present for me in my relationship to the Bresson film. But I was also interested in this image of the kind of brawl in the bar. And again, we have this sort of gendered violence, which actually that's me going off, working in a Bressonian way, but kind of independently in a way. And then, so I'll just show you the last few slides. So, yes, okay. So basically, I just wanted to finish by saying that I think there was for me this kind of reference in the image of the breaking glass in the bar scene to Kristallnacht, but that's kind of incidental. I think I don't think there's any intentionality there whatsoever. So so just with the book, the book was was in black and white. It was working with, it made a reference to Jacques Prévert's Bim, Le Petit Âne, which is also a story of a mistreated donkey. And the photo novella is a French tradition, and so the publisher was a French publisher. So that was kind of what motivated the switch. But yeah, sorry, I've overrun slightly. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, it's working. Okay, thank you, both of you. Really interesting to hear more about your projects, and to see all the overlaps between the ways we work, which are, I think, quite clear. I'm aware that we're kind of slightly aliens here in this context and aware of the time. So I'd like to I've got lots of cans of worms here, which I'm not going to open now. So I'd like to open it up immediately to any sort of questions people might have. And then that triggers our conversation. Yep.
I just wanted to ask, Richard, because you show your students that line about make something that's not been seen before. I just wonder how how generally or specifically they respond to that. Just because they live in a very mediated world where reproduction of imagery is so hard to find something truly original. Do you find that it provokes them or flummoxes them?
If I'm being totally honest, I think they get excited. I think, especially, I would say within it might be a different situation in the art schools, where students are used to having a lot of creative freedom. Because Richmond is a liberal arts college, so they take lots of different classes. So when they come and I'm giving them, it's like, this is all about you and you determining what you're going to do and finding your own path. They get very kind of excited by that. I think that's a really interesting question about that can also be terrifying. But I would say, I guess we'd have to speak to my students, but I think generally in the room, it feels like they're excited by that. And I have a lot of enthusiasm saying, this is your space. Filmmaking's really cool. Let's see what you can do with it. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
can I just add to that? Because in a way, because we all use appropriation or very kind of direct references, that's something that's been seen before.
Yeah.
However, we're reworking it and reinterpreting it, and appropriation is a kind of process that's not new to us. There's a long established history of it. So I think, there's a kind of flux there. There's a contradiction, which I think shows that any of those rules are there to be broken.
And I just to follow up, I think we're working now in a time in filmmaking where actually there is a lot of new things for them. Like lots of students are on TikTok a lot. I don't use it because I'm too old, but there's things there that they haven't seen before as well. It's a new like genre of filmmaking. It's new, so it's quite an exciting time, I think, to be a young filmmaker. It's like, it's not about this screen necessarily. There's all of these other contexts. Yeah.
Hi, I'd like to ask Sarah something. A few of us have just seen the film. I think it's a really beautiful film. I do congratulate you on the film. It's a lovely, beautiful film, and that idea of mimicry is interesting because it actually, those images of Azad and Balthazar actually live in a very Bressonian way, but they have their own life, which is amazing. But the one thing I wanted to ask you was the relationship between the text and the image. Obviously, that's the kind of crucial thing. And I found it quite difficult to sort of decode the text initially for the first few minutes. I got halfway through, I sort of got hold of it and began to sort of see it. And I wondered whether this might feel like a crass question, but and maybe it is a crass question, but did you ever think of using a sound, using a voice rather than just a text?
Yeah, that was a big decision. So, because for a long time, that's what I was going to do. And I guess, first of all, I had the thing of, well, whose voice is it? Are they a man? Are they women? Are they young? Are they old? Are they, do they sound British? Do they sound, Hungarian? So that was one thing. And then I guess also I thought that it would be a performance. the reading of the script would be a performance. And then I also wanted because it's difficult subject matter, and I wanted the viewers to hear the words inside their head. So that's really why. But it meant I had to cut out a lot of the material. And so in the book, which is next door, there's an insert with a longer version, the original longer version of the script. And that's really important to me, that people have access to that. So the book is like a book of the film, but then there's this insert that gives more information. So, yeah. It was a tough decision to make, yeah.
Where's the microphone now?
Hi, thanks. Why do you all think that hands and feet make for such good images?
There's a can of worms. Sarah,
I think it was just a one-off on the hands for me.
I mean, I was thinking about hands and thinking about agency and lack of agency. And actually, there's been a sort of fashion for a while in the art world, lots of images of hands appearing in art. And it felt very Bressonian. And I was thinking about this feeling of, losing purchase on our ability to control things because of, technology. Maybe that being part of. But yeah, I don't know what you think.
Well, I think for me, I think with the kind of films and the sort of installation work and that I make, and I think with the books that I collaborate on with Tamsin, which we're going to talk a little bit about more later, I think like deep in my soul, I feel like images are the way I need to communicate with the world, and that there is like a kind of like visual language, and I think hands, like I'm doing now, are a sort of way of like accessing that in some ways. Yeah, they say a lot, and most people have got two of them, and can start to read meaning and receive information via them. So I think, I'm really interested. I think Bresson is with me there from Tina's films. And
just continuing on the theme of hands, I wonder if you know the wonderful essay by the art historian Henri Faucillon, who is at Yale after he left France, called In Praise of Hands. It's fantastic, isn't it? I wrote an essay on Godard's Histoire du Cinéma, and in one of the last chapters, I think it is the last chapter of the Histoire du Cinéma, it's all about hands. And I quote from the Faucillon essay because it's so fantastic. Sarah Pickering, I wonder if you thought about, in your wonderful piece on pickpocket, about the book that Bresson mentions, that was the manual for Michel in Pickpocket, the George Barrington's, I can't think of it's like a guide to pickpocketing in the film, right? It's an English book. I actually looked it up. I don't know if you...
I think there's a facsimile of it, but the kind of trajectory of that project, I decided to work with a pickpocket, and I thought, I should really watch that movie. And so it kind of went that route, and to me it was like the imagery then and the act of the pickpocket, the reverse pickpocketing. But yeah, I did research it, I did look it up, but it felt like that would be like more kind of more material that wasn't necessary in a way to resolve the idea.
Exactly. Well, it was really fascinating. I can't wait to see your film, Sarah.
Thank you.
We've got maybe enough time for sort of like one or two more questions. So are there any other questions back in the room?
Are there any questions on Zoom? Yeah, okay.
I guess I'll rather selfishly ask a question then of all of us. And I think this sort of came about thinking about some of the things we learned yesterday. So we had which is a shame you missed the first panel, you couldn't be here because you're still traveling, but we had a whole panel about sort of Bresson and photography, which Sally presented. We had this like analysis of Bresson and his use of the pose and the body, which I think is very relevant to our projects. And then Elise Durant in her project talked about these sort of particular images within Bresson, and she had mentioned that she came to film via practicing photography. And I think within our projects, there's this tension between those mediums of like the still and the moving, and expanding the image. And I wondered, why might it be that us working in these particular gaps are so drawn to these images from Bresson?
I mean, I think there is a really strong sense of the still in Bresson's work, and there's a very strong sense of the still, and so I think there is a real following from photographers, and but also the way that time is experienced, because it's sort of internal time. So so there is, I mean, it's not like Ozu or something where it's just very slow, but it's very sort of subjective time. I mean, it's not always like that, because you're not always kind of inhabiting the character's subjectivity, but there are passages which are like that, where you kind of don't know where you are in time. So
Yeah, I think that I'm really looking forward to catching up on yesterday's panel, because just seeing some of the stills which are in the room next door as well, so fascinating to think how that background sort of really underpins like this sense of an expansiveness and thought within a frame. And I really like the idea of the production still as well, being emblematic of a movie as a whole. So I think, but it's really packed out with narrative, the frame.
Okay, I think we're gonna leave it there. I think we've been thinking about Bresson's influence on us, and I think again yesterday I was reminded Bresson started as a painter, so he was kind of one of us. So that might be why we can kind of identify with him so closely as well. Thanks to everybody. Just to sort of point out that, Sarah's The Donkey Field will be screening during the lunch break and again in the afternoon. And also the Donkey Field book that Sarah showed us is available from Tamsin in A4. Okay, so we're going to take a break now for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back with our next panel. Thank you.